The notification appeared at 9:47 on a Saturday evening, and I almost didn't see it. I had spent the day finishing a residential permit review, the kind of work that follows you home, elevation drawings spread across the kitchen table, coffee gone cold. When I finally cleared the papers and picked up my phone, I wasn't looking for anything in particular. I was only checking whether the dry cleaner had confirmed my pickup. Instead, my sister Renata's name appeared at the top of my feed, and the image loaded before I could decide whether I wanted it to. A long table. Linen napkins. My parents standing at the center. My mother, Lorraine, in the ivory dress she bought for occasions she considered worthy of remembering, and my father, Gerald, looking pleased in a way he rarely permitted himself in photographs. All around them, cousins, old neighbors, my aunt who lives in Baton Rouge and calls twice a year. Champagne glasses raised. Everyone smiling the way people smile when they believe they are being witnessed at their best. The caption read, "Together at last. Every person who matters, under one roof." I set the phone face down on the table. Then I picked it up again. I am a structural engineer. I spend my professional life identifying where load is distributed, where stress concentrates, where a system will fail if a single element is removed. There is a particular clarity that comes from that kind of thinking, a refusal to mistake appearance for structure. I looked at that photograph and understood something I had been too patient to name for several years. I had not been forgotten. I had been edited out. For 11 years since I'd taken my first salaried position at 26, I had been the financial undergirding of my parents' household in ways that required no announcement because no one thought to make one. It began with a loan that was never repaid and matured into something more permanent: monthly contributions toward their mortgage, help with the property tax in April, the occasional emergency that arrived with the same phrasing every time, "We didn't want to bother you, but..." I told myself this was what adult children did. I told myself the absence of gratitude wasn't the same as the absence of love. I had a talent for telling myself things. Renata was 4 years younger and had always occupied more space in the room than her size warranted. When we were children, my mother framed Renata's drawings on the refrigerator and stored my science fair medals in the hall closet. I understood even then that this was not coincidence, it was editorial policy. I was the responsible one, which meant I was the expected one, which meant nothing I did required celebration. Achievement without struggle, my mother seemed to believe, was simply performance of duty. When Renata's first marriage ended, she moved home. My mother described this to neighbors as an act of courage. When I moved to Portland for a position I had competed for against 42 applicants, my mother described this to the same neighbors as Meredith always has to go her own way. The evening of the photograph, I sat in my apartment and let the image stay open on my screen until its meaning fully arrived. Then I typed a single comment beneath Renata's caption, "Congratulations. The mortgage is yours now." I posted it. I did not delete it. I set the phone on the counter and made tea. 14 minutes later, I had 37 missed calls. I did not answer. I watched the numbers accumulate, my mother's name, Renata's name, a number I didn't recognize, and I felt, beneath the noise of it, something I can only describe as the sensation of a calculation resolving. I had been the load-bearing wall they had built their comfort against. The question of what happens when a load-bearing wall steps aside is, in structural terms, straightforward. The calls stopped after an hour. A message arrived from my mother. "You have humiliated this family. You are being vindictive and selfish." I read it once and placed the phone in a drawer. 2 weeks passed. I stopped the monthly transfer. This required no confrontation, no explanation. I simply did not initiate it, and my bank account, for the first time in years, held its balance across the end of the month. I noticed this with something close to wonder, the way you notice a sound only when it stops. On the 3rd week, a letter arrived. The return address was the mortgage servicer, forwarded from my parents' address. I opened it expecting nothing consequential, and found my name printed at the top of the document in the way names appear in legal filings. I read the letter twice. Then I read it a 3rd time. My name was listed on a refinancing agreement executed 18 months earlier. A refinancing that had raised the balance by $60,000 and extended the loan term by 12 years. I had not signed this document. I had at some earlier point granted my father limited online access to a joint account we'd used for payment transfers, a convenience. Someone had used that access as an entry point. Someone had known how to move through the system and had moved through it deliberately, timing both required confirmations within a single afternoon. I sat with this information for a long time. Not because I was deciding what to do, I knew what to do, but because there is a specific quality of stillness that arrives when you stop trying to interpret something charitably and let it mean exactly what it means. The next morning I called the lender's fraud division and requested a formal review. The specialist I spoke with, a careful, unhurried woman named Patricia Nolan, walked me through the documentation trail. The timestamps. The IP records. The pattern of confirmations. She spoke without editorial comment, which I appreciated. She said the evidence would need to be reviewed, that the process had defined steps, that I should secure a copy of everything. I already had copies. I had made them before I called. The attorney I retained, a property law specialist named Douglas Fitch, reviewed the refinancing documents in under 20 minutes. He did not pause dramatically. He simply noted, in the tone of someone reading a straightforward contract clause, "This is unauthorized use of your digital authorization. It's fraud. We file to remove your name and initiate a civil complaint." He asked me whether I wanted to proceed. I said yes without hesitation. Renata called once in the middle of all this. Her voice carried that particular register she'd perfected over decades: warm surface, strategic interior. She said she hoped we could talk before things escalated, that this had all been a misunderstanding, that I needed to consider what I was doing to the family. I let her finish. Then I said, "The lender's fraud division is conducting a review. Douglas Fitch is representing me. I don't have anything else to discuss." I ended the call. The confrontation, when it came, was not dramatic. It happened in a coffee shop my mother had chosen, neutral ground. She must have imagined, though nothing about the meeting was neutral. She arrived with Renata and my father, who took the chair nearest the wall and appeared to be studying the table surface. My mother wore her careful expression, the one she deployed for situations requiring management. I had brought the documentation in a folder. I placed it between us without opening it. My mother said that everyone had made mistakes, that families went through difficult periods, that surely we could find a way to move past this. Renata suggested that perhaps my reaction had been disproportionate. I let them finish. Then I opened the folder and placed a single page on the table. The time-stamped refinancing confirmation. I didn't make a speech. I said, "You used my authorization to refinance the house without my knowledge. The lender has the records. Douglas has the records. I have filed to remove my name." My mother looked at the page. Renata looked at the page. My father looked at the wall. What I remember most is how quiet it was. Not the quiet of resolution. The quiet of a structure that has lost its support and has not yet registered that it is falling. I left money on the table for my coffee and walked out. The court process took 4 months. The outcome was what Douglas had predicted. My name was removed from the loan, the fraudulent authorization was documented, and the liability was formally reassigned. The house entered foreclosure 6 weeks later. I did not watch this happen. I heard about it at a remove through Fitch's office, through a brief message from Patricia Nolan confirming the case was closed. I moved in February. A smaller apartment, west-facing, with a window that catches the afternoon light across the kitchen counter. I bought a good lamp and a second-hand reading chair and assembled both myself. On the first morning I made coffee and sat by the window and felt, not triumph, not grief, but something that felt like correct measurement. Like a load finally distributed to the members actually designed to carry it. I still think sometimes about the photograph. My mother in ivory. The champagne glasses. The caption. There is a version of that image I was never meant to complicate, and I understand now that this is what I had been for years, not a daughter but a condition of possibility. The infrastructure behind the portrait. I don't say this with bitterness. I say it because naming something accurately is not the same as being destroyed by it. Some structures require removal before you understand that the load was never yours to carry. Have you ever held something up for so long that you forgot you were holding it and only understood the weight when you finally set it down?